Assalamu alaikum, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and I am here seeing you again with lecture 32, the last lecture of the series of drama 2, that is modern drama. As we have started our reviews from the 28th lecture based on the entire content that we have covered so far, in today's lecture we are going to review the last text, Pygmalion, that is written by George Bernard Shaw. So today's talk will primarily be a review talk based on the drama, where we will try to cover all the aspects that we have covered in the entire discussion related to this very text of the modern drama. Pygmalion, as the name suggests, and as we have discussed in our lectures, which basically included all the discussion based on the drama, is a reference from Greek mythology. And George Bernard Shaw, who used this Greek mythology to create a modern reflection of a household that was located in a modern era of 20th century that captures the life between two world wars. First World War where it ends and the Second World War where it begins. So George Bernard Shaw grew up in an atmosphere of genteel poverty, which to him was more humiliating than being merely poor. That is why we find that middle-class morality is one of the major themes discussed by Bernard Shaw in his dramas, since he finds genteel poverty is a bigger crime than being merely poor. So, just to refresh your memories about whatsoever we have discussed so far, and starting with the very concept of the myth behind the play. There is never an overt reference in the play to Pygmalion. Shaw assumes a classical understanding. And what is that classical understanding? According to the mythological guide that is easily available online, and if you would want to go to the mythological guide, you can just Google it and can reach to the destination. The myth was something that Pygmalion saw so much to blame in women that he came at last to abhor the relation with them. Pygmalion was an artist. Pygmalion was the name of the artist, and he had so much to blame in women that he eventually started hating them. So he hated any kind of relation that can be maintained between men and women, and resolved and finally decided to live unmarried for all of his life. That he's not going to make any relation with women. He was a sculptor by profession and had made with wonderful skill a statue of ivory. Since he was a sculptor, he was an artist, he created a masterpiece of his art. That was a statue made of ivory. So it was such a beautiful statue, such a beautiful piece of art that no living woman could be compared to it in its beauty. It was such a beautiful art of piece and such a marvelous reflection of a woman's beauty. Now, it was indeed the perfect seam balance of a maiden that seemed to be alive. Now, there are two things. First, it was a masterpiece of a woman's beauty. It was just perfect. Secondly, it was such a wonderful, a piece of an art that it does not feel that you are looking at a statue. If you're looking at it, it would feel you're looking at a living woman. This was the mastery of Pygmalion's art, and only prevented from moving by modesty. So his art was so perfect. Here we are talking about Pygmalion, that his art was so perfect that it concealed itself and its product looked like the workmanship of nature. So Pygmalion admired his own work. he had no reason but to admire his own work because of the praise that he received from the world outside, and at last fell in love with the counterfeit creation. And he liked his much and admired his own work so much that eventually he fell in love with it. So oftentimes he laid his hand upon it as if to assume herself whether it were living or not. So the master himself got confused about his own masterpiece, thinking whether it's living being or not, and could not even then believe that it was only an ivory statue. The festival of Venus was at hand, a festival celebrated with great pomp and cypress. So victims are offered, the altars smoked, and the odor of incense filled the air. So this was the kind of festival that Pygmalion attended, and it was named as Festival of Venus. When Pygmalion had performed his part in the solo mince, he stood before the altar and timidly said, "Ye gods, who can do all things, give me, I pray you, for my wife." He dared not say my ivory virgin, but said instead, "One like my ivory virgin." Venus, who was present at the festival, heard him. It's a myth. It's a Greek mythology. So please take it as like that. So it was believed that the god of Venus, he was present at the festival and he heard the prayers of Pygmalion. While he stands astonished and glad, though doubting and fears he may be mistaken, again and again with a lover's ardor he touches the object of his hopes. And what happens when the god of Venus hears Pygmalion's prayers? That he gives life to the statue of ivory. And this makes the artist Pygmalion astonished as well as glad, that being doubtful and fearful, he again and again had been touching the statue to feel whether it's dream or it's happening in reality. It was indeed alive. The Venus, when pressed, yielded to the finger and then resumed their roundness. Then at last the votary of Venus found words to thank the goddess, and pressed his lips upon lips as real as his own. So this was the theme and the myth of Pygmalion, the mythological reference that Pygmalion, Bernard Shaw attached with his drama. And we have been studying this aspect in almost all the drama, that the civilization of that time, the people of that time, the theater of that time, since it was a series of Greek concepts and traditions, so people took a lot of interest in Greek myths, and they could not, let themselves be away from that magic and sublimity of events that Greek mythology explains. So, in order to capture people's attention and at the same time maintain the spirit of the modern era, that was to changing and shifting its focus from the elite class to the poor and middle class people, a man of everyday life, a layman, a poor man who lives there, who is going through all those sufferings. And that is why he or she could be, possibly be, or potentially be, or should be the protagonist of the drama. George Bernard Shaw, like all other writers of the modern era, tried to produce a beautiful combination of modern philosophy and Greek mythology. And here he produces Pygmalion, a masterpiece of his work. So, one of the most popular plays of Bernard Shaw, first performed in 1913 in Vienna and published and performed in London in 1916. Pygmalion was Bernard Shaw's first most popular performances that was initially performed in 1913 and then after 3 years in London. So now after knowing about Pygmalion's myth, we need to understand what was the contextual background in which the drama has been located. Pygmalion is basically, as I shared with you, it's a reflection of modern life of 20th century. However, to make it more specific, if we allocate this into its context, we will get to know that Pygmalion is set in London, England, more specifically, around the beginning of the 20th century. Now, during the time in London, working class people like Eliza Doolittle lived in slums. They had no heat or hot water. They had to put coins in a meter to get electric light. So this gives you an idea of the life London would have at that time, number one. Number two, the kind of segregation between elite class, middle class, and poor class. Number three, what kind of life a poor person had been living and would have could have always, could have dreamed about. The poor people, what all they could have was slums, a life in slums, no heating system, no hot water, and even to get electric light, they had to put coins in it. So that was the governmental attitude towards the classes in London. So, the class structure in England at this time was very, very rigid. Now, what is this rigidity of class structure? Basically, the London was rather fairly divided into classes. Upper class, middle class, and working class. Elite class, middle class, or poor class. And these classes were not only divided, they were rather segregated. They were separated. And they were separated by different aspects, different active, visible ingredients that we are going to talk about later in our talk today. However, one important thing that I would like you to know at this point is that these segregations and these separations were like watertight compartments. No working class could enter into middle class, no middle class could enter into upper class, and upper class had to keep and maintain their distance with all the other classes. So to grow and let the system of this separation and segregation grow and prevail. So this segregation was creating chaos, and it was adding into the luxury of people who already had a luxurious life and taking away all the rights of living from the poor people who already had no rights at all. So this was the class structure and the division, social division, class division that England was facing at that time. So the government did provide some education, some schooling to all the classes. However, an education did not teach the proper speech that was considered a sign of the upper class. The way that many working class people spoke was an obstacle to their becoming middle class. So the ingredients, the aspects of segregation that I was referring to, although it includes so many of the things, however, the major aspect, one of the major things would be the control of language, the power of language. How this elite component was being exploited in the era, that the proper speech was only taught to elite class people, and it was not taught to the middle class and poor class people. Although schooling was available, some schooling was available, government schooling was available for the middle and poor class. However, the language was controlled as the tool to exercise power, and that is why the art of articulation was something that was preserved only for the people who would belong to elite class. So the way that many working class people, poor people, would speak the language, English language, their native language, was an obstacle to their becoming member of any other class, because that was one major thing that helped keeping these segregations maintained. Now, what is George Bernard Shaw's philosophy? We know that all these writers, and primarily the writers of modern era, they were not only writers, they were social reformers, since they wrote in the time when the life was full of chaos, full of disturbance, illusion, and the life was destroyed as a whole, since it was produced, that this literature was produced between two world wars. And warfare is something that can only be perceived as an event of destruction. So George Bernard Shaw, as a writer, like all other writers of his time, had a philosophy where he wanted to do all the social reforms. Along with that, he had a particular aspect to convey, a message to convey to the people as his own personal contribution. Now let's get into his philosophy and see how he is embedding his philosophy into his famous work, Pygmalion. George Bernard Shaw says, and I quote, "I must warn my readers that my attacks are directed against themselves, not against my stage figures." Shaw. So Shaw says that my stage figures, first of all, are not only characters, they are representatives of the world where my readers live in. Secondly, my representatives are not the embodiments of the good and evil that I show on the stage. It's the reflection of the society. And here, when I reflect society, my attacks are clear and direct. And readers, they are warned that they need to understand it. So beautifully, he conveys the way he is going to use his art. And here we understand that in modern era, art has not been used for the art's sake. Rather, it had the element of reality not only attached with it, but overwhelming. Shaw wanted to force his viewers to face the reality of unpleasant events. He promoted the unpleasant plays by publishing a long preface in which he could argue his views. Now, this is one important thing that we need to understand and keep in our conscious when we are reading Bernard Shaw's plays, that he is the one who did not only provide his readers with the glimpses of reality in his plays, but also he prepares his readers to get into that reality, witness it, and be a part of it. And that is what he does by writing a long preface to his dramas, where he would prepare his readers to face the kind of reality that he's going to portray. So for that matter, Shaw was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1925, and he continued to write until he was 94. So the significant aspects of Shaw's writing are not only making him a social reformer, but also that he would prepare his readers to read and understand his writing, and that made him win the Nobel Prize. Now, understanding what is the Pygmalion's effect, we can take help from what Maya Wilmec projected, the kind of the image of Shaw's writing, and then what kind of effect they provide to the readers. If we focus on this image, this circular image that is provided to us, we can understand that Pygmalion has a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, how does it impact the readers? The very first thing is, the very first destination, the very first target to hit in readers' conscious is that what we believe influences how we behave. So our behaviors are basically derived by our beliefs. What we believe influences how we behave. So our beliefs are very important. Whatever they are, they basically derive our behaviors. If we see this circular motion moves on and tells us that likewise how we behave impacts what people think about us. What we believe derives our behaviors. How we behave basically let people perceive us in a particular manner and let them understand us as people, as personalities. And then in turn this affects how others behave towards us. Now, what we believe derives our behavior. How we behave let people understand as us, and in return they basically design their own behaviors consciously or unconsciously. And eventually what happens that how they behave towards us reinforces what we believed about ourselves in the first place. So this is all basically what we believe about ourselves, and this instigates, this provokes this circle of self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is the effect of Pygmalion, and you will find this effect throughout the reading of this play. You definitely would have found that. Now, to refresh your memories, I would like to give you a plot overview. In this play, George Bernard Shaw uses humor and lively characterization to explore how language, class structure, class divide, education, and gender influence how people are seen by society. This is very important. So the position that Shaw is taking in its play is of a social reformer who primarily is focusing on four major aspects of the society, the modern society of 20th century, where he's trying to dig out the problems related with the art of articulation and the language, speech, and class division, social divide, education and its significance, and how does it manipulate all other aspects of one's personality, as well as gender discrimination, if there is any, and how all these factors contribute into building up a society, and what type of society is basically a consequence of such beliefs. So we see that the two main characters of this play, Pygmalion by Bernard Shaw, are Eliza Doolittle and Henry Higgins. Now, Eliza Doolittle is a poor flower-selling girl, but a very proud, however, with a Cockney accent. This accent basically tells us that the girl belongs to working class, poor class, and she has a thick accent of speech, a way of speaking associated with working class significantly. So we find Eliza a representation of working class people, female representation of working class people. Then we have Henry Higgins, an arrogant and insensitive linguistic professor who is somewhere in between middle class and elite class. Since he is a professor, he's an educated being, this gives him power. Secondly, he is professor of linguistics. He can exercise this tool of power for his benefit. Again, this gives him power. Thirdly, that he is somebody who can use his traits and his skills to earn him fortune. So we can find him in between two of these classes, elite class and middle class. Now, Eliza comes to Higgins' house to ask him to give her speech lessons. And the context, the background of this expectation and this desire, as you must have watched us into the movie as well, in fact the very first scene of the movie narrates how Eliza Doolittle tends to think about and get inspired by Higgins' speech, art of speech, and how can she think about that Higgins can ever teach her lessons of language. We can recall that in the very first scene of the movie that is based on Pygmalion, and the name of the movie is My Fair Lady, we see that when Henry Higgins meet a crowd of people in front of church, and all these people are taking shelter due to the rain outside, and they get free from a party. There Higgins is taking his notes, speech notes, to look into the different varieties of speech and varieties of language which are produced by natives. And at the same time, when he gets to see Colonel Pickering, who happens to be his desire and one of his future plans to go to India to see the professor of Sanskrit, when they both get together and they are discussing about the different accents and different varieties of language being spoken in England, and how the art of speech is insulted by those who are not able to speak for certain reasons. At that time, when Higgins is focusing over the speech produced by Eliza Doolittle due to her thick and cockney accent, he claims that he possesses such art of speech, and he is he has some techniques and strategies. Since he is a professor of phonetics and phonology, he can train a cockney accent, a thick accent girl like Eliza to pass off like Duchess in only 6 months' time. And this will bring her not only fame and fortune, but would also let her work at any of the flower shop where a good accent is required. So this claim by Henry Higgins basically influences Eliza to think on such lines, and eventually she dreams of learning and getting lessons from Higgins for her speech. Now, why do she wants to learn and improve language? It's only that she wants to learn to speak properly so that she can get a job in a flower shop instead of selling flowers on the street. And this very aspect should remind you of her beautiful song in the very beginning, when she is basically articulating her very innocent desires, I would say. Now, Higgins decides to take the girl on as a professional challenge. Now, we know and we can recall that when Eliza Doolittle comes to Higgins' place, in the very first place, Higgins is not willing at all to take Eliza in. As soon as he gets to know that it's the same Cockney accent girl for whom he has taken enough notes, he is not at all interested to waste any more time on this girl, because he has already recorded her samples. However, Eliza Doolittle, she pushes in, and she just is trying to convince Higgins that he can give her lessons because she is ready to pay back for his efforts. However, this sounds really ridiculous for a professor of linguistics, and however, on giving him motivation by Colonel Pickering, who is enticing him to now prove his words of his big claims that he made when he saw and heard Eliza for the first time, and now it is the time to take the challenge and transform this Cockney accent girl into a lady. So now what Colonel Pickering does is he boosts to his associate linguistics, professor of linguistics, Professor Higgins, and that with 6 months of lessons, Eliza could be passed off as a duchess. So this was the background of the bet set between three of these people, in fact between two of these gentlemen. Higgins has Eliza moved to his home. Now again there is a dispute in the background of this very move in the drama, because this does not happen just like that. Although we find that as soon as Higgins accepts the challenge, he is very enthusiastic and very active to start with his task of transforming Eliza into a lady. However, when he's about to start with his challenge, he finds Mrs. Pearce, somebody who has taken a stand for the poor girl, with the notion that Higgins has no right to take over any of the poor girls for his own reasons, and that the girl definitely would have her parents behind, and this is Higgins' moral duty to ask first of all the girl's parents for this experiment that he's going to exercise on the girl, and secondly the girl has all the rights to know exactly what is going to happen to her and with her freedom, because if it is going to be a 6 months contract, it is understood that for the 6 months time she is expected to stay at Higgins' place. So what happens that when Mrs. Pearce, she provokes these feelings into both of these gentlemen, although not Higgins is very active and very positive about such comments. However, Colonel Pickering, it feels that he has taken a stand then for Eliza, and he talks about the same things and then enforces Higgins to do accordingly. Although Higgins does not take a lot of effect of such big words, however, he is forced to very quickly, diplomatically tell Eliza that what is going to be the contract between Eliza and Professor Higgins, as a matter of fact. So, with the help of Pickering and the housekeeper, Mrs. Pearce, he teaches Eliza the proper speech and manners of the upper class. Although Eliza wants to learn, there is tension between her and Higgins all the time. She also wants to be treated with respect as a person. However, Higgins persists in treating her as a project and an object. Now, we get to know that although Higgins is performing his duty very well and he is teaching Eliza the language lessons and teaching her techniques and strategies, how can she overcome the flaws and gaps in her language. However, at the same time, both of these people, the protagonist Eliza and the antagonist Professor Henry Higgins, they have tensions in between them. And most of these tensions relate to this very aspect. Then Henry Higgins is not willing to treat Eliza as a different human being according to his philosophy that he treats everybody alike. At the same time, what Eliza expects from him is respect, because she thinks that she is mistreated due to the fact that she belongs to working class. Will Eliza and Henry Higgins become friends, or will their difference drive them apart? If Higgins' experiment succeeds, where will Eliza go from there? Will learning to speak like a duchess allow her to live like one? These are three major questions which basically help develop the plot of Pygmalion. Will Eliza and Henry Higgins will able to derive their differences apart? Will they be able to cover those differences? Will Higgins be successful in his experiment? And if it happens at all, will Eliza be able to speak like duchess and live like one as well? These are questions not only into reader's mind, but they are standing as big alerts into Eliza's mind too. Now, after having a review of the plot and looking at a few important things, what we need to revise our understanding, what we need to refresh our memories about different characters who are playing significant roles in the play. So, first of all, we are going to talk about the protagonist of the play, Eliza Doolittle. Her role in the drama is of protagonist. She is the main character. However, she is a poor flower girl who sells flowers to earn her living, and at the same time who wishes to be rich as well as happy, because she thinks once she is able to learn and speak the language, she'll be able to work in a flower shop, and that will turn her fortune for good. Now, what kind of relationships she's keeping in the play? She's daughter of Alfred Doolittle. Alfred Doolittle, who is a representation of middle class morality in the play. And she's an experiment subject to Professor Henry Higgins as well as to Pickering, and possibly means more to Higgins. When we move on with the plot of the drama, we learn and we understand that her character is not only a subject for Professor Henry Higgins, but he also associates with her, and shares a kind of feeling that is unnamed and that remains unnamed in the play by Shaw. Now, what kind of conflict relates to this character of the play? Basically, she cannot change her inner characteristics to suit the newly changed and reformed appearance of her. She argues with Higgins on this subject, that no matter how reformed she can get from outside, she is the same girl from inside. However, now this change into her inner self and outer self is begetting a conflict that stands as a question in front of her and in front of society too. The significance of her character can be understood very well when we try to question that, is she able to stay true to herself and not conform to please society? And we get to know that she is a character who believes in being truthful to herself. Her belief on her being good character does not only let her behave as a good girl, but also let people in society understand her as a good girl and behave like that. So she is a significant character for this aspect, that she speaks of Shaw's philosophy regarding beliefs in the play. Now, the second important character is of Mr. Higgins. What role Mr. Higgins plays in the drama is of antagonist. He is professor of phonetics and tries to teach Eliza the proper ways of society. Now, what are those proper ways? As we just discussed, that one of the proper ways can be the art of articulation, speaking like educated natives. And due to this education, division of education and differences of education, there were separate compartments, there were division in social life, and this social life again shows the class difference prevailing in that society. So professor of phonetics tries to bridge this gap by transforming a flower girl into a lady and by giving her proper ways, and in those proper ways, one proper way is of art of articulation. What relationships he is bearing in the play? He is friend to Colonel Pickering. He wishes to be friends with Eliza, though, however, due to the differences that they share, the tensions in between both of these characters, for most of the part in the play, they cannot be friends. Although we get to know that by the end of the drama, and probably in the sequence of the play, we find that Eliza get to be a friend with Professor Henry Higgins. However, most of the drama, Pygmalion, deals with the severe tensions between both of these characters. Now, what conflict that is resulted due to this character is that he tries to change Eliza's personality, but she won't let him. What she wants to learn is art of speech. What she is here for, being subject of experiment, is language. She wants to have language lessons. She wants to sound educated. However, what Higgins is up to, Higgins cannot differentiate the education, the art of articulation, and the personality. So what he is transforming as a consequence is of Eliza's personality, and here the conflict starts. He also has a hard time understanding women too, because that is one thing that he would never wish to understand. What significance Shaw has in the play? His actions show that no one can change another's character. We can change traits of our characters, of our personalities. We can change our habits. We can improve our learnings. We can improve our knowledge. But characters cannot be changed altogether. Now, the third important character is of Colonel Pickering. The role of Colonel Pickering is another important role. He is another researcher of phonetics and phonology, and is known and is famous for the language of Sanskrit, the Indian language, and Indian phonetics and phonology. The relationship that he keeps with the most of the characters is different. He is friends to Higgins as well as a very good friend to Eliza. The conflict that he's trying to resolve, he's trying to get Eliza and Higgins to understand each other and each other's philosophy as a human being. And the significance attached with his character is that he did not change his morals to suit Higgins' needs. Mrs. Pearce is a motherly figure, and she is a housekeeper at Professor Higgins' place. She plays as a protector of Eliza most of the time and keeps Higgins in straight lines. Now, she has trouble in trying to reason with Higgins most of the time because she's not able to understand about the differences between Higgins' words and actions. She is a role model to Eliza as well. Freddy plays a significant role, if not in this drama, but in the sequence where she marries Eliza. However, in this drama, she is an ideal image of a man at the time, to Eliza at least. And he has feelings for the poor girl as well. She gets to develop those feelings over time, and they eventually marry. He argues with the people of his society on his choice of Eliza, and he gives hope to Eliza in the time of adversity. Now, we need to discuss the theme of class representation in the play, and before that we do that, we need to see who are these characters representing different class divisions. We find that Professor Higgins, he is an impatient, rude, confident, superior, self-important person, and we find Colonel Pickering as a kind, polite, generous, enthusiastic, eager as well as confident professor, and we know Eliza Doolittle as anxious, eager, emotional, ambitious, however unsure girl, where Eliza is representing lower class, and she behaves as respectful to people of higher class, and she calls gentlemen sir and cap in or caption, which is a compliment. Now, Henry Higgins represents middle class. However, his behavior is very rude and patronizing to lower class. He is polite to same or upper class. And as a matter of fact, he calls Eliza, "You silly girl," and many of the times we would hear him calling her squashed cabbage. And Pickering calls her, he calls Pickering, "my dear man," an equal and friend. Colonel Pickering is a representative of upper class, and he keeps a behavior generally of a confident and polite, but ignores Eliza too. And as a matter of fact, he prepared to begin a conversation with Henry, whom he does not know, generous with praise to him. And on the screen you can see a transformation glimpse from a poor girl to Eliza Doolittle. Now let us have a word about themes and the major conflicts in the play Pygmalion by Bernard Shaw. So the major conflicts that we are to discuss in this play relate to status divide, class division, gender relationships, self-consciousness, and social snobbery, ostentation. Now, first of all, a word about the status divide. Let me quickly make you recall what you understood about it. So the nature of class structure is upper class, middle class, and low working class. Higgins, Colonel Pickering, Mrs. Higgins, Mrs. Clare, and Freddy Hill, they all belong to upper class. Mrs. Pearce, she does not, however, represent middle class morality alone. In many ways, that is also a quality of Higgins and Colonel Pickering's class. Eliza, Alfred Doolittle, and his never seen but often heard about wife, Eliza's stepmother, belong to lower working class. A vast gulf between the poor and even the lower upper class. Higgins' cast-off change is a fortune to Eliza, who assumes later that he must have been drunk. Eliza's belief that riding in a taxi is the ultimate badge of upper class quality of life. Now, the relationship between genders. No, 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 you two indefinitely stupid male creatures. So, neither Colonel Pickering nor Henry Higgins have a clue about the situation they are putting Eliza or themselves into. Mrs. Pearce recognizes that Higgins is immorally using the power granted him by his practical culture to pressurize Eliza. A pressure which, if she gives in, could lead her to a life of wickedness. So, the self-consciousness, the self-perception, Eliza's sense of worth, she is infected with the lie. Eliza learns that women in the upper classes, in fact, do not have the independence that women of the lower classes do. They must be connected to a man in some way to be respectable within middle-class morality. Eliza rejects being a gold digger, and Higgins rejects female puppy dog tricks. Only a working skill frees Eliza. Eliza has a powerful sense of her value. I'm a good girl, I am. Therefore, she will never become a kept woman. She has ambition, willing to give up 2/3 of her daily income to improve herself. But she is infected with class prejudice. Put the girls in their place just a bit. You are going to allow yourself to marry that low-born woman? So, Eliza's struggle to work at a flower shop, she is infected by social snobbery herself. She discovers that a rise in culture means a loss of independence, as does her stepmother. Eventually, she achieves independence by improving on her skills. Probably the most important conflict in the play is of the class system, that Eliza is primarily an antagonist in that. Now, the themes of the drama: language and communication, transformation, identity, appearances and manipulation. Society and class, women and femininity, dreams, hopes and plans, and middle-class morality. We hear language in all its forms in Pygmalion, everything from slang and small talk to heartfelt pleas and big talk about soul and poverty. We are discussing the theme of language and communication. Depending on the situation and depending on whom you ask, language can separate or connect people, degrade or elevate, transform or prevent transformation. Language we earn doesn't necessarily need to be true to be effective. It can deceive just as easily as it can reveal the truth. It is ultimately what binds Pygmalion together, and it pays to read carefully. Even something as small as a single word can define a person. So, we see that the theme can best be defined by dividing into some subcategories like science of language, act of speech, ambivalence, status, and misinterpretations. Moreover, they can also be defined as different sorts of influences, unifying forces, emotional links, associations, as well as act of rebel. Now, the theme of transformation. This one may seem like a no-brainer. Pygmalion's all about turning a poor girl into a duchess. Well, Eliza's metamorphosis is really stunning. You could even go as far as to call it a Cinderella story. But remember that Cinderella turned back into a poor girl before she finally found her prince. Pay attention and you'll notice that not all the attempts at transformation here are successful. There are plenty of false starts and false endings. By play's end, Shaw's made one thing very clear: be careful what you wish for. And this theme can further be understood into its subcategories of status divide, perceptions, environmental stability, and overambitiousness. Moreover, there are certain fears and certain controls that would help you understand this theme of transformation, as fear of unknown, control of emotions, and control of manners. And we have discussed all these things in detail when we were covering our lectures based on Pygmalion by Bernard Shaw. Moreover, the theme of subjectivity, nature, and confidence let us extend our understanding on the theme of transformation in the play. Now, theme of identity. Every single day we talk about ourselves, saying, I did this, I did that, I am and I am not. But we don't usually think about what this very I means. In Pygmalion, Shaw forces us to think this through. Some characters want to change who they are. Others don't want to change at all. Things get even more complicated when identities are made up, constructed. The play wants us to ask ourselves what it really means to think about different versions of the self, and whether that self can ever really be changed. Now, the theme of identity can further be understood as minor details of a personality, gender-specific attitudes, uncertainty in one's life, prejudice, and stereotypes, objectives versus subjectiveness, clash within personality, multidimensionality, as well as fallacies attached with a character. Now, theme of appearance. Is beauty only skin deep? Is it in the eyes of the beholder? Or is it the consequence of social circumstances? Shaw's more interested in dealing with the big questions, like that last one, than with old saws. In Pygmalion, anything from a pair of boots to a boat to an expensive dress can tell us important stuff about a character, like their place in the world or their state of mind. They can reveal what might normally be hidden from view or hide that which might normally be obvious. So, appearances can be deceiving, and the trick is learning how to judge what is true and what is false. The thing is, it's not an easy skill to pick up. So, the theme of appearance can further be understood by its subcategories of physical appeal, standards of appearance, behavior, deceptive attributes, language versus visual, awareness, genteel poverty, subject to change, conflicts, and acknowledgements. Now, theme of manipulation. In Pygmalion, we see different types of influence and control, sometimes literal and other times metaphorical. The teacher training his students, the artist shaping his creation, the con artist fleecing his mark, the child playing with his toy. That said, these roles aren't always well defined. They can change easily without warning. Sometimes the master becomes the slave and the slave the master, as you would see in Waiting for Godot. In the blink of the eye, while other times the two simply become equals. Shaw wants us to observe these changes and transformations in our real lives and the consequences of control to see how these changes occur and why. Now, this theme of manipulation can further be understood by these subcategories of ambitiousness, entertainment, behavior, control, rhetoric, as well as uncompassionate behavior, excitement, fears, reversibility, as well as transformation. Now, theme of society and class. In Pygmalion, we observe a society divided, separated by language, education, and wealth. Shaw gives us a chance to see how that gap can be bridged, both successfully and unsuccessfully. As he portrays it, London society cannot simply be defined by two terms, rich and poor. There is a lot that goes in between that. Within each group, there are smaller, less obvious distinctions, and it is in the middle, in that gray area between wealth and poverty, that many of the most difficult questions arise, and from which the most surprising truths emerge. A lot, as you have probably guessed, has changed in the last century. Back when Shaw wrote Pygmalion, women could not vote in the United Kingdom. In 1918, women over the age of 30 were given the right, and it took another 10 years for all women to be given a voice. Shaw's depiction of women and attitudes toward them is impressively and sometimes confusingly varied. They are shown in conventional roles as mothers and housekeepers, and as strong-willed and independent characters. The play pays special attention to the problem of women's place in society, or lack thereof. And Shaw offers no easy answers to the tough questions that arise. So, the theme of dreams, hopes, and plans. Mick Jagger is right when he sings, "You can't always get what you want." It's true. Sometimes, just by trying, you can get what you need, but that's not always the way it works. What if you get what you want only to find out it isn't what you imagined it would be? What if your dreams come true only to turn into nightmares? They say the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray. Well, in Pygmalion, that's true. That said, Shaw also shows us what happens after everything ends up wrong. He offers no quick fixes, but he does leave room for hope. So this is the end of the discussion based on our review on the drama Pygmalion, written by George Bernard Shaw. And we had a detailed discussion, and I hope that you will be now by now you would have been prepared about your understanding about not only about this drama but about all the contents that we covered so far. So this was the 4th lecture of the series after 28 lecture based on reviews of all 4 dramas that we covered in the content of drama 2, modern drama, and as well as this is the last lecture 32 of the series of modern drama lectures that is known to you as drama 2. And in this series of lectures, in 32 lectures, we covered 4 writers and 4 dramas by them. We initially did Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, then we did Sean O'Cassie's Juno and the Peacock, then we did Waiting for Godot by Beckett, and the last was Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. I hope that I have been able to do justice with making you understand the concepts and explaining difficult things to you, and by the material that has been shared so far, you would have been able to extend your understanding about all of this material. With this, I will wish you best of luck for your final examination, for your final assessment. Inshallah, see you once again somewhere sometime. And this was all for today's talk and for all these 32 lectures. Allah Hafiz.